we are up to the portion of Yisro. Turn to page, your third sheet. Yeah. I don't. I'll get you another one later. All right. Okay. So we left off last week with an understanding, hopefully, of the first book of the Torah, of the family of Israel, and we spoke about the fundamentals of Judaism, why we have all of the stories that we have in the Torah, why it's so important to have those. They're not just stories, they're not laws, they are a way of life. They're giving us a path to connection with God. Okay, now we talk about the nation of Israel. In the book of Exodus, we talk about the nation of Israel, and that the nation of Israel is in exile in Egypt. We're there for 210 years. There's a new king that comes into power who doesn't know Joseph. Who's Joseph? I have no idea what Joseph is. And he basically wants the Jews annihilated. What's his scheme? His scheme is, let's kill all the baby boys, throw them into the Nile. And Moses is saved, right? Because he was taken from the waters. And we saw that we had the 7 plagues, then that God sent Moses back to Egypt, and God sends a message via Moshe that go tell Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the Jewish people out, he's going to be in trouble. The 7 plagues ensue. We have then in Parshas Va'era, and then the remaining 3 plagues are played out in Parshas Bo, which is the 3rd portion, and that's the Jews getting out of Egypt. And then in Bashalach we have the Egypt out of the Jews, which is the Jewish people that they witness or they experience the splitting of the sea, and then the Egyptians drown. The Jews cross on dry land. They have the salvation. They sing the song by the sea, the Az Yashir Moshe. The Jews are tested. They have the bitter waters. They receive the manna in the desert. It's an incredible thing. If you go out on a camping trip and you don't bring food, what are you going to do? You're going to starve. Yet the Jewish people are here in the desert for how many years? 40 years. 40 years. And what happens? How do they live every single day? Through the hand of God making a miracle of the manna. And then the Jews are tested with the bitter waters, right? They have the preparation for Shabbos. God tells them to prepare for Shabbos. And the water comes from the rock. One of the reasons that it came from the rock, which is why I added it here as an important point, is because this was a punishment. That the Jewish people received the punishment. Anybody know why? Because of Abraham. Abraham, our forefather, served very, very elegantly to the 3 angels that came to visit him. There was one part of his welcoming of those guests that he did not do by himself, and that he sent his messenger to go bring them, and that was the water. God says, if you don't go bring the water by yourself, I'm not going to give the water directly to the Jewish people either. They're going to get it through a third party. They got it through the rock. Everything that we do, every action has a reaction. It may not be today. It may be many generations. But every action has a reaction. Okay. I believe it's up to 7 generations, because it's 7 generations from Abraham to Moses. Okay. Okay. We start the 5th portion now, and that is the parsha of Yisro. Now, these 2 portions, Yisro and Mishpatim, number 5 and number 6 in Exodus, are about the Jewish people accepting the Torah. Now, very, very important to remember, every single nation in the world had a prophet. Everybody had a prophet, and every one of those prophets got the same email from God. do you want to receive the Torah and be my chosen nation? And every single one said, what's in it? What's in it? What's in it? What's in it? Every single one. And God told them, right? He told the French, thou shalt not have adultery. Forget it, that's not for us. But to the Arabs, they said, thou shalt not steal. They're known for theft. Thou shalt not steal. Forget it. And each one of the nations asked and got the answer that was relevant to them, and they said, forget it, it's not for us. The Jewish people, now the joke goes, the Jewish people asked, how much is it? And God said, it's free. They said, oh, we'll take 2, right? So that's the 2 tablets that we got. But the truth is that it was the Jewish people just said, we will do and we will listen later. We're going to do it. We're committed because we want this relationship. What the commandments are, the details, we'll worry about the details later. It's almost like a car dealership. It's like you just buy the car. Later on, you'll find out, how well it drives. Okay, either way. So we start off the portion of Yisro. Yisro, by the way, was a non-Jew. He was Moses' father-in-law. And Yisro was a soon-to-be convert to Judaism. But it says, Vayishma Yitro. It says that Yisro heard. Jethro heard. What did he hear? Ma shmua shama v'ba. Right? What did he hear that caused him to come? Right? Here you are. You have the Jewish people in the desert. Every single person in the world was reading the New York Times, the Sinai Times, right? They're reading the India Times. They're reading the papers, and what comes up? You know what comes up? The sea splits, just like God had predicted it through the word of Moses. Right? The 10 plagues. The 10 plagues happened exactly like Moses said, just like God told him to say. Every single one of these miracles happened. And what happens? Silence. The UN is silent. Nobody says a word. Right? Nothing changed, by the way. Yisro says, this can't be. I got to see this for myself. You're telling me that there's a people, that all of this happened to them? I want to see this with my own eyes. He heard. He heard. He got the message. Every single one of us have messages being sent to us every single day. We have messages that God is sending to us through various different sources. Some of them are coming from friends. We think they're friends. I mentioned here they're probably angels that are being sent by God. And you ask them, why did you say that? And they're like, me? I never said such a thing. Right? Like, I know why they say. They don't remember it because God put those words in their mouth. Right? There's a famous story about one of the great sages. A woman came to ask him a question, what to do in her marriage, and the rabbi really had no clue what to answer her. The rabbi said, give me 1 minute, I'm going to go to the other room. He goes to the other room and he starts crying. He says, God, please, I don't know what to say. I'm going back out and I'm starting to speak, and whatever you put in my mouth is your words. I don't know what to say. I have no wisdom that can help guide this person. This is beyond me. Put the words in my mouth. Right? We all have these tests, these challenges that come our way. The question is whether or not we're going to be like Israel and we're going to hear the message. Are we going to be awake enough to listen to the message? Right? Okay. That's why Yisro heard. And that's why we started with this week's parsha. And this is the reason why the 10 Commandments are given specifically in the portion of Yisro. By the way, there's no portion named for Moses. There's no portion named for Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. There's no portion named for Aaron. There's a portion for Yisro, a non-Jew. Why? Because there's something you can learn from everybody. And the lesson we learn from here is he heard the message and he sprung into action. That's what we need to learn. Don't just hear the message and say, well, one day. No, I got to do something about it now. And that's what we learn from Yisro. Yisro reacted and joined the people. Now, they're rejoicing there. He gives advice to Moses. He does leadership training. He teaches them how to have not a pyramid scheme, but rather a pyramid of leadership, where Moses is at the top, and then he has the leaders of all the tribes, and then the leaders of all the tribes had people under them. And that way, if someone had a question, They didn't have to bother Moses with an answer. Moses was busy with bigger things. Like this, they were able to go directly to a person who was responsible for, I think there was a rabbi for every 10 or every 100, right? Right? And that way, people would be able to get their answers. And now don't forget that this is just when the Jewish people are receiving the Torah. So when they're receiving the Torah, there are a lot of questions. I mean, today we think we have questions, right? You should think of what it was 3,300 years ago in the desert. And they're talking about things that are not yet relevant, like we saw in this week's parsha that we read. We read about what's going to happen when the Jewish people enter into the land of Israel, and they're going to start performing the mitzvah of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. It's not going to be till 70 years later. 40 years in the desert, it says, I think it was 35 years after they got into the land of Israel that they started observing the laws of Shemitah.
Why did it take that long?
So I think it's because they didn't fully conquer it yet. It wasn't completely theirs. All right, so, okay. Then we have like this. 50 days later, they arrive at Sinai. And now God tells them, start preparing yourselves for receiving the Torah. The day of revelation. This is the day where the Jewish people will have a revelation that no people have ever seen, have ever experienced. And it's very important. If you want to know the proofs of why Judaism is a true religion, I'm not talking about other religions, whether or not they are or not. That's not our topic tonight. But why Judaism is 100% true is because there is a public revelation to the masses. If you look at other religions, you'll see that they're always an individual revelation to an individual. Right? So Muhammad had a dream where God told him that he is his messenger and he is his prophet. Well, it's like two brothers. I've shared this example before. It's like two brothers fighting over an inheritance. So one brother goes to the other brother, he says, it's all mine. Daddy told me it's all mine. The other one goes to the other, he says, no, Daddy told me it's all mine. Right? So now they're both fighting over this inheritance. Whose is it? Who's going to get it? So they don't know what to do yet. Next morning, one of the brothers wakes up and he says to the other brother, I'm telling you, I know 100% sure that it's mine. He says, how do you know? He says, Dad came to me last night in a dream. And he told me that it's mine. He says, genius. If Dad wanted it to be yours, he would come to me in the dream. Right? He wouldn't go to you, he'd come to me and tell me that it's for you. Right? For him to go to you and tell you that it's yours, that doesn't help us. Here you have a revelation that's not being experienced by one person. Here is a revelation that's being experienced by 3.2 million people standing by Mount Sinai. 3.2 million people. And nobody had a contradicting story to the experience. See, that's the thing. It's like, if I were to declare here that I am God, and here's the book, follow this book which says, I've taken you out of Katy and brought you to New Jersey, you'd be like, this guy's a lunatic. We were never with him in Katy. He's never taken us to New Jersey. Right? What's like? You take the book, you'd find the nearest recycling bin, and you throw the book out because it's full of inaccuracies. But if it's an individual can make up whatever he wants. And then not only that, he'll call you an infidel and take off your head if you don't believe in him. So then the next one is afraid not to believe in him. It's also the only religion that does not proselytize. We don't want converts. I mean, converts, once they're converted, are welcome, and they have to be welcomed as part of the Jewish people with no exception. And God has terrible revenge to those who don't treat converts properly. But in the process of conversion, they're pushed away. We want to make sure that they're authentic. We're not here for numbers. It's not a numbers game. So now there's another point also, which is that the Jewish people are the only religion that tell the nations of the world and those who are converting, you can find your perfection without converting to Judaism. You don't need to be Jewish in order to find. You can be a Ben Noah, you can observe the 7 laws of Noah, and you get your world to come. You fulfill, you don't have to be Jewish for that. It's the only religion that says you don't have to believe in our Torah to reach heaven. The only religion. Every other religion, if you don't believe, you don't accept the Lord and Savior, if you don't this, if you don't that, then eternal damnation. Right? In Judaism, we don't have that. The non-Jews, there are righteous non-Jews. You don't have to be Jewish to be righteous. Okay? Okay. Now, this is a national revelation. Here, the Jewish people, again, 3.2 million people are standing around this mountain. And they receive the 10 Commandments. Now, what exactly happened here? The Midrash explains that each one of there are 2 different opinions in how this happened. Either that the first 2 utterances of the 10 Commandments, the first commandment, was all 10 of them in one shot. It was like a jolt of this spirituality, and all of the people died. Right here. The Midrash says that they were resurrected. And then again, the second commandment. Also, all 10 commandments in one utterance. And again, the Jewish people died. And at this point, they told Moses, we die once more, we're not coming back. Because this is our bodies can't handle such a zap. Right? Because imagine, it's like we explained this before, when a baby is born, baby cries. Why does a baby cry? It cries because it doesn't want to be here. This baby was in another world where it was all spiritual, it was all holy, it was all connected, it was immersed in a spiritual environment, and suddenly it comes into a physical body. It's locked in this cage. It wants to get out. It's like, get me out of here. I don't want to be here. So it cries. It says, I don't want to be here. Take me out. So we give it a lollipop, and we give him balloons, and we make a birthday party, yay, right? Then we make all these celebrations, and just forget about that you're a soul, really. Just continue indulging in your body. I would buy birthday gifts, just stay busy with the trains, and stay busy with the cars, and with the dolls, and with all these other things, so that you don't realize that you really are a soul that needs to be worked with a body, not just a body maximize the world of pleasure. Right? That's why a baby cries. A baby cries because it's not happy in this state. It doesn't want to be here. It doesn't want to, it's not comfortable here for the soul. Here, the Jewish people receive this lightning bolt of spirituality. What happens? The soul's left them. It was too much for the body. It was too elevated. It was too big of an explosion of spirituality for them to handle it. So that's where we get, that's yeah.
So what happened?
Oh, the third one on?
I mean, if they all died, then
Oh, so God revived us. We were resuscitated, right? God, it was a resurrection. And then a second time, and then from then on, all of the commandments were given by Moses. Okay? If you look carefully at the terminology in the 10 Commandments, you'll see that it was already given in a less direct, the third person. Okay. Any questions? We're good? Okay, great. So, we have, I am Hashem your God. There should be no other God before me, right? And we have, you shall not say God's name in vain. Remember the Shabbos, honor your father and mother, which is all on the first tablet, which is the mitzvahs between man and God. The second tablet was the mitzvahs between man and man, and that is, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and do not covet. Now, if you think about this, and those are the mitzvahs between man and man. Now, you look at it very simply the first time you ask, if those are the mitzvahs between man and God, then why is honor your father and mother part of that side? Shouldn't that be between man and man? So our sages explain that we have 3 partners to the creation of a human being. The father, the mother, and God. The father and mother provide the different elements of the human physical form, but God gives us our soul. And we say every morning in our morning prayer, Elokai, Neshama shenatata bi ta'orani. God, the soul that you placed within me is pure. The soul comes from God. That doesn't come from the father and mother. Right? That comes from God. So, if we neglect our respect to one of those three partners, then the whole partnership is out. You can't be disrespectful to your parents and have a proper respect for God. There's something missing. That's why it's placed on the tablet of the commandments that are between man and God. Right? And that's the fifth commandment. So the foundation of our covenant, everything that we have is built around the Ten Commandments. So we have the mitzvah of Shabbos, which is in the Ten Commandments, but then we have the bris, which is the circumcision, which is on the flesh a sign between man and God. And we also have another one, which is the tefillin, which we bind on our arms, and the tefillin that we place on our head, which is a constant reminder that we have to subordinate our mind to God, or dedicate our mind to God, and subordinate our heart to the will of Hashem. Because the mind thinks thoughts. We mentioned this in our Sunday morning class at Brit Shalom. A little plug. So we have the intention, we have a thought in our mind, but what's going to get our heart to do it? The two different worlds, the two different powers that we have. How many times did you think, you know what? It's really not a good thing to speed because it's against the law. Does that stop you from speeding? No. Because your intellect knows it, but your heart doesn't necessarily act it. So that's where our work comes. It's not an easy work, where we know something, but we don't actually do that something. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge that we need to teach ourselves to really connect the two, so that our heart acts the way that our mind knows is the right way for us to act. Right? And it's a lot of work to get there, but through the study of Torah, that's how we go. That's how we get there. So the revelation is too powerful. The Jews couldn't hear directly from God anymore. Third commandment already is in third person. Don't say God's name in vain. Moshe ascends to receive the rest of the Torah. And, very critical, the oral explanations. This is a big mistake, a huge mistake, that people think that the oral law is just a bunch of laws that the rabbis made up. It's not true. All of the oral laws that we have are those that were given to Moses at Mount Sinai. We know, we've said this dozens of times, we've said it in this series a couple of times already as well. There is a fundamental difference between what's written in the written law and in the oral law. In the written law we write what to do, and in the oral law we know how to do. The Torah tells us, for example, to put the tefillin between our eyes. Right? Last I checked, that's not where we put it. Right? We put it up here. How do we know to put it up there? Oh, Moses taught us that. Well, how did he teach us that? That was the oral law that was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, and later transmitted to Joshua and to the elders and so on and so forth, till us, like we have here on our list, 133 links, unbroken links, from Moses at Mount Sinai all the way to us learning here today. 133 links unbroken. Nothing here is made up. The oral tradition going from generation to generation, where we know on what side of the door do we place a mezuzah and what is in that mezuzah. We wouldn't know.
Rabbi?
Yes?
I got a question about the mezuzah.
Mm-hmm.
You say always there's three things that the Jews have to do. Shabbat, tefillin, and circumcision.
And
why is it mezuzah in there?
Mezuzah is not something on our flesh and blood. It's not something which is on our flesh. It's not over time. It's over a place. See, Shabbos is over time. The bris is over our physical body. Kosher, by the way, is over our soul. Mezuzah is on our house. It's on our house. Yes.
Aren't you commanded to put
1 second, but if you go elsewhere, you go to a place which is not, you go on vacation, you go to your office, right? Okay, your own office maybe is different, but if you go to your company, non-Jewish people, you don't have mezuzah, so it's not. These are things that are relevant wherever you are. Okay, the Shabbos, the tefillin, the bris, the kosher. Doesn't make a difference where in the world you are. These are always with you. Every Shabbos, it's the time has to take a break. Okay, Moses ascends to receive the rest of the Torah. And yeah.
Is there any halacha around today that is question whether it's Moshe and Sinai?
What do you mean? There are three, I believe there's 3 or maybe 4 laws that were not given to Moses in Mount Sinai, and that the rabbis instituted, right? Hanukkah, Purim, those 2 holidays as one. I believe one of them is the Netilas Yadayim, washing our hands. The laws of, I mentioned them in the first class. I believe I mentioned in the first class what they were. I don't recall off the top of my head, but there are certain laws, but very limited few.
Like we lean the mezuzah inwards instead of just very vertical.
Okay, so I'll tell you. Okay, so it's very, very interesting. There are 2 different customs. The law that we put it on the doorpost is a biblical law. Question now is how we put it on the door. Okay, so that there are 2 different customs. There's the custom like Rambam, which is you put it completely vertical, and the other custom is that you put it completely horizontal. What do? We put it diagonal, right? Why? Why? So many sages explain the following. It's a really beautiful idea. Because to remind the Jews, it's the only time you find a compromise in halacha. The only time that you find a compromise. You don't see where the sages say, oh, he owes him 200 and he says he owes him 100, let him just pay 150. It's either 200 or it's 100. There's no compromise. One is right and one is not. So we don't see a compromise. It's either vertical or horizontal. How do we do it? We compromise. Only time you see that there's a compromise in Allah. The reason is because every time you walk into your home, you remember that if you want to have happiness in that home, you need to compromise. It's a reminder every time you walk into your home. Compromise is the key to happiness in your home. And if you don't have compromise, right? If you don't have compromise, happiness may be beyond you. Which is, now, Sephardic, keep it straight, right? Sephardic, keep it straight. That's because the wife is always right.
They keep it straight?
Yeah, they keep it straight.
I don't buy the Sephardic Ashkenazi. For me, it doesn't mean anything. But I have a really very short 2 questions. You mentioned that a few things over, the tefillin is over our what? Tefillin.
Yeah.
Is over what?
We,
Body.
yeah, it's over our mind,
Our mind. Thank you.
and our heart, opposite our heart.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And another question is, wouldn't the mezuzah, as he said, be the same since both of them have the Shema prayer in it? Wouldn't that be as well mezuzah as the tefillin over our mind and heart?
What do you ask? I don't understand.
See, I think there's a difference between a mitzvah which has to do with the person versus a mitzvah which has to do with our home. One is a mitzvah that's
It's like our temple.
look, if you don't have a home, you don't have to do the mezuzah. But you always have to keep Shabbos. And you always have to keep kosher. And you always have to put on tefillin regardless of where you are. But if I'm not home, if I'm in Israel, if I'm vacationing in Hawaii, I don't have to have a mitzvah mezuzah because it's not my home. So you understand? Plus, one is over me as a person and one is over my home. I think not having a physical object be the essential connector I think, for a mitzvah is also an important lesson for us.
And one very, I'm sorry I'm asking too many questions. You mentioned that kosher over our soul.
Right.
That is really, I've never heard that.
Right, so many people think, it's very interesting, the food you eat is what you are. All right, I give this example in my kosher class, Kosher 101. You see this piece right over here, this nice piece of flesh right here, right? You know what this flesh was once? I think a juicy steak, right? Or maybe sushi, I'm not sure, right? But something, now, if this was non-kosher, right, because your body recycles all of your flesh every 30 days. So this skin is not the same skin anymore. It's already new skin. From what? From the food I ate within the last 30 days. So if I eat non-kosher, my physical being becomes non-kosher as well. It's not just like, well, what goes in goes out and that's it. It's no big deal. Right? Okay, that's number one. And that houses our soul. Okay, but there's something much more than that. Food, we only know about food from how it tastes. But there's something which is in the shoresh haneshama of the food that we eat. There's something which is in the roots of the soul of what we're eating. I'll give you just a quick example and move on because it's really not our topic, but it's very, very interesting. Do you know why we don't eat the eagle? The Midrash says, I believe it's in Parshas Vayakhel or Pekudei, it says why we eat certain animals, because this one has mercy, because this one has kindness, because this one has this, and this one is not an aggressor, or now certain aggressive animals, we don't eat them. Okay. So why don't we eat the eagle? We don't. Why don't we? The eagle, the Midrash says, is the most merciful animal. Merciful. You know why? You know the way a kid goat, it gets treated by its mother? Its mother doesn't like it at all. So it takes it to a cliff. It goes for a walk, a stroll, mother and child. Right? And it gets near the cliff and it kicks its young off the cliff. And you know what happens? The eagle comes, catches it midair, and brings it back to earth, and at that point the mother doesn't kick it off again. True story. This is the way it happens.
Wait, I've never heard of that.
Go search it. Go search it on
There
YouTube.
must be a lot of eagles flying around then.
So what's the meaning of that?
One second. So then, even more so, if it gives us such a great quality of mercy, shouldn't we then for sure eat it? So the Midrash says that if we had such a high level of mercy, we would go crazy. We would go crazy. We wouldn't be able to function as human beings. That's why it's not kosher.
Man, nobody can take the goats.
Well, then also, right? God has his ways, trust me. All right. So we're up to the next portion.
We become, our behavior sort of becomes animal-like.
Exactly. Well, we from what we take in, we're influenced.
You are what you eat.
You are what you eat. Okay? Okay, next portion is Mishpatim. Great question, thank you. Next portion is Mishpatim, and that means ordinances or laws. Okay, civil laws, teaching of sensitivity. Incredible. The Torah doesn't give us laws just to make our lives miserable. Contrary to what many people, including some rabbis, would tell you. The rabbis were bored. The rabbis just wanted to make your life miserable, so they gave you all these commandments. It's not true. God gives us the most incredible set of rules. The most incredible set of rules that guide us to the greatest sensitivity humanly possible. One quick example: if someone comes to you to borrow money. Comes to ask for $20. You say, listen, I don't like to just lend out money. Do you have something that I can get back in return for, as collateral? Right? No problem. I have a pillow. I have a pillow that you can take as collateral. Right? You take it. It's one of those. How do you call it? The form pillows. It's a really comfortable pillow. What? Tempur-Pedic. There we go. Tempur-Pedic pillow. And he says, no problem. He gives it to you. You know what you have to do every night?
Give it back.
Every night you got to give it back so that he can sleep like a mensch. It's good. He can owe you money, and He can give you the collateral, but you have to give it back when he needs it. Right? He'll give you something else instead. He'll give you his pen that he needs for the next day. Right? There's still a human element. We also see that if you have his servant, you have to give them food to eat. You have someone who works. You hire a day worker. You hire someone to work. You pick him up at Home Depot. We're not going to talk about his legality. We're not going to talk about that. Okay? It's not the topic here. Depending on who's president. But you pick him up. You have to feed him lunch. You have to give him time. You have to give him a break. And if he's Jewish, you have to give him time to pray. By the ordinance of the Torah. Because it's not enough to be right. You have to be a mensch. And the Torah teaches us. I'll just tell you a quick thing. We mentioned this by Parshas Noach. We said Noach ish, Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim yevdoratav. Noach was a man who was righteous in his days. So Rav Mordechai Gifter, one of the great sages who lived in Cleveland, Ohio. So they say in his name that he was by his grandson's bar mitzvah. It was in that week's parsha. So they asked him to speak. He really didn't want to speak, but he got up and he said, we see Ela toldot Noach, Noach ish. Noach was a mensch. He says, my blessing to you is you be a mensch. He was an ish, he was a mensch. That's a big thing, to be a mensch. The Torah teaches us how to be the quintessential mensch. What it means to be a mensch. Okay, we're commandment to observe the day of rest for the land, which is Shemitah, and the week, which is Shabbos. We have the three pilgrimages, pilgrimage festivals, the Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And we again have the repetition of the promise of the land of Israel, at that point being called the land of Canaan, being promised to the Jewish people. The next 5 portions, Teruma, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, Vayakhel, and Pekudei, are all talking about the building of the tabernacle. All right? The first 2, Teruma and Tetzaveh, are Moses gets the instructions. And the first, of which Teruma, is about the structure and vessels, and the second is the priestly garments. Okay, the tabernacle. God dwells in our midst while we travel through the desert. Wherever we traveled, the tabernacle traveled. It says the Aron was noseh et nosav. Right? The Aron, which was the ark, which had the tablets in it, which later had the 13th copy of the Torah scroll in it, it carried those who carried it. You think, you pick it up, it's really heavy. It has the tablets in it, right? It lifted up the people who carried it. You thought you had to be strong for it. It carried you. It was also the microcosm of the universe. The tabernacle had all of the elements, and we can't get into it now, but it had all of the elements of the universe. To understanding the secrets of the universe, everything was in the tabernacle. Moses gets the instructions on how to build the tabernacle, the blueprints of the tabernacle, the design of structure and vessels, the ark, the cover, the table, the menorah, the walls, the partitions, the altar, and the courtyard. Now it's very important to know this. Wherever we see the talking, we see the description of how the tabernacle was built, or it's being built, we see right next to it the mention of keep my Shabbos, guard my Shabbos, protect my Shabbos. Don't build the tabernacle on Shabbos. So our sages learned from this. Again, this was not something that the rabbis made up 2,000 years later. Right? Moses explained this. Just as there are 39 different actions that cannot be done with the assembly and this assembly of the tabernacle on Shabbat, so too these are the 39 laws of prohibited labors, prohibited creative labors on Shabbat. If you want to know what's permitted and what's prohibited on Shabbat, all creative labors are prohibited on Shabbat. Let's take an example quickly. It's an example, if you've heard it before, you've heard it probably several times. Okay, so let's take an example of what hard work is. Colby, right? I asked you, you know what? It's Shabbos morning, and I want to make this room available for the kids to play over here with their toys. So, you know what? Would you help me carry all of these tables into the next room. Right? Does that work? It's a lot of work. These are heavy tables. Right? It's a lot of work. Is that considered prohibited work on Shabbat? Why not? So you're not allowed to work on Shabbos. But it's work. Now, I'm asking you another question. To flick on the light switch, is that work? That's not work. It's creative labor. Work is not prohibited on Shabbat. The terminology is a joke. It's like they're playing with the terminologies. Work is not prohibited on Shabbat. Creative labor is prohibited on Shabbat. Okay? So moving the tables is not creative labor, but flicking that light switch is creative labor. That's prohibited on Shabbat. And if you look at any one of those laws, of the 39 prohibited categories of laws that are prohibited on Shabbat, they're all things that are creative labor versus just work. Work itself is not necessarily prohibited, but rather, I can tell you, thank God we have the incredible merit of having many people by us on Shabbos. I can tell you my wife works very hard on Shabbos. It's a lot of work, but it's not creative labor. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. It's all got to be cooked before Shabbat. Everything is prepared for before Shabbat. Now, why is Shabbos such an amazing emphasis that we see in the Torah? I believe it's 12 or more times that the prohibition of Shabbat and keep my Shabbat and watch my Shabbat and protect my Shabbat. Why is there such an obsession of Shabbat in the Torah? So our sages tell us like this. Shabbos is a weekly reminder that we're here temporarily. Just like we work all 6 days of the week. On Shabbos, boom, it's all over. There's no more work. Whatever you did on the weekday is what you have. What you have on Shabbos is whatever's left over. So let's take an example of you're preparing for Shabbat. You're preparing to cook for Shabbat. So you can prepare to cook all the way till 18 minutes before sunset Friday night. And from that point on, you light your Shabbos candles, and now you're on cruise control. It all stops. There's no more labor. There's no more work. Nada. It's all over. Why? Because every single week it's another... Why? Because God commanded us, but it's a reminder that we work our entire life, but that day comes where Shabbos kicks in, which is the end of our life, and we can't do anything else. Oh, I wanted to apologize to this person. I wanted to pay back. Too late. It's all over. Right? Every week we have the reminder that there's a cutoff point. And that cutoff point is the end of our life, from which that point on, we can no longer modify, change, or adjust any of the details of what preceded that. That's why the Mishnah tells us, consider every day to be your last day. The way the Mishnah says it is, repent one day before you die. What day is that exactly? Well, it may be tomorrow, so repent today.
Rabbi, is Shabbat a creation?
There's a disagreement in that, whether or not Shabbat is a day of creation, it was a creation of rest, or it was the lack of creation that created that rest.
That's a different opinion?
Yeah, there are two different opinions. I believe in the Talmud that's discussed whether Shabbos itself was a creation or not.
Is there a fine line of distinction between creative work and work?
Yeah.
I mean, there's controversy.
Yeah, there are 4 big books that I would recommend that discuss every single one of those creative labors. I'll give you. I don't want to get into example because any example I'm going to talk about is going to really take things. We can discuss it if you'd like. We can have another series after this. We can do for 39 weeks. We can do 39 different laws.
Is there controversy with families? I mean, within a family, what's work and what's not work?
No. The Torah tells us very clearly. The Halacha tells us very clearly what is considered, what isn't considered. Halacha says it very,
It points out all the things.
Oh yeah, it's very clear. For example, building a building. Am I allowed to build a building? Put blocks. Start putting cement. Can I plant a flower? It's creative labor, right? All of these things. Can I bake? It's also creative. So anything having to do with the process of baking is also prohibited. From sowing to harvesting to winnowing to everything. The whole process of making bread which was needed in the tabernacle, the whole process, 11 steps, all prohibited on Shabbat.
So it's clear cut. But it's
Clear
not
cut. It is clear cut. It's absolutely clear cut. Now, so people ask this a lot. I think if we're doing a crash course through the Torah, it's important for us to mention this. If we say that everything is clear cut, Rabbi, if you look around, there are about 150, maybe even 1,000 different Hasidic movements, right? You have every shape and size. You have, this one wears a shiny coat, this one wears this type of hat, this one wears this type of belt, this one wears this type of shoes and that type of boots and that type of socks and white socks and white and black socks and some wear with a tie, without a tie, you have every shape and size you can possibly imagine, all the different strands of Judaism. But one thing they all agree on. They all agree on the principles of the Torah. Now, whether or not, it means the basic principles everybody agrees on. Nobody says, well, labor is permitted on Shabbos, right? Creative labor is permitted on Shabbos. None of them say that you can light a fire on Shabbos. None of them. They follow the Shulchan Aruch again. The Shulchan Aruch is based on the oral law, or the halacha is based on the oral law, which is based on the written law, right? See Introduction to Bible Crash Course, right? Video number 1. The rabbis, Rabbi Yosef Karo, or Moshe Ishalish, right? The Rambam, they didn't just come up with laws and say, you know what? I decided that this shouldn't be okay. No such thing. It had to be based on something. It had to be based on a verse in the Torah, on a conclusion of a Talmud discussion, which was based on a verse in the Torah. So it's not enough for us to say, well, I think, in my subjective opinion, that it should be like this. Now, I'm not, without mentioning anything of any specific movement, but there was a movement that made a significant change and altered the law of one of the major laws of Shabbat, and later on retracted that permission because they realized there was a mistake. Right? It's pretty significant because that was really the impetus to create what today is known as suburban Jewry. So a Jew, because of that ruling, felt I can move to Katy because I can always travel to synagogue on Shabbos, and that caused a very, very, very big problem. And I think the results of it are pretty clear, is that it didn't grow synagogue participation, it didn't grow observance, it did quite the opposite. I don't want to talk about it, we're online here, I don't know, people are going to start throwing stuff.
One quick one.
Yeah.
Isn't some of the stuff that you can't do on Shabbat anticipatory? In other words, you can't ride a bicycle because you might break the pedal, right? Mm-hmm. You can't ride a horse because you might break a branch. Right. You can't play an instrument because you might break a string. But that's all anticipatory stuff. It's not creative labor. But it could be. Is that why it's prohibited?
Right. So there are some things that the rabbi said it's going to lead almost certainly to a biblical prohibition. So we're going to make an extra fence so that you don't fall into that trap. Because what happens, you're not riding your horse the whole day. Right? Anybody gone horseback riding? After an hour or so, it gets very tiring. So what do? Right? You start schmoozing. Right? You schmooze with all your friends, you tie up your horse, right? You sit on the horse, you're leaning on the branch, so what's going on? How was your week? Right? Before you know, it comes right off. So the rabbis thought to the practicality of what's going to happen when you ride that horse. Not that you're riding the horse. What's that horse that ran? Yeah. Okay. Right. Not the horse that ran now on the track. What was it in Kentucky Derby? What was it?
Gulf Street.
In Indiana. Okay, whichever one it was, but not that one. Right. But do you think that those horses are running fast and he's just going to grab onto a branch? He'll probably fall off. Grabbing onto a branch. But not that. Okay. We got a lot.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
It's a great stuff.
What's that?
It's a great stuff. We
We have only one more week next week.
Gotta move
By
on.
the way, I just want to mention, Kol Hakavod, this week is Memorial Day, and everyone's here. I'm really impressed. So Kol Hakavod, everybody. All right, Parshas Tetzaveh. Now we're talking about the priestly garments, the humanly side of the tabernacle. Moses gets instruction on how to design the priestly vestments. The small Kohen had 4 garments, and the high priest had 8 garments. There was only one high priest at a time. There weren't several. Now, it's very important for us to remember this. There are no special privileges in Judaism, period. None. Even the Kohen Gadol, he had to put on tefillin every single day. He had to observe the laws of Shabbat like everybody else, except when he was actually serving in the temple. But there were no exceptions to the rules. In Judaism, we don't have like, oh, Moses, he's a bigwig, so he's not going to it doesn't apply to him. The laws apply to every child like they do to an adult, like they do to a rabbi, like they do to a great Torah scholar. Everybody is obligated to the same exact laws, the same exact rules, with no exceptions.
I meant that he had certain privileges that the others.
Privileges, yes, but no exceptions to the rules. In other religions, you find, if you go to the seminary, or if you go to this, or if you go to that, then you're obligated to certain, then you can't get married, or you can't this. It doesn't go like that. Every single Jew is obligated to the same exact set of laws, to the same exact set of rules. All right, so what are the 8 clothes? You had the apron, the robe, the hat, the breastplate, the headplate, the coat, the breeches, and I'm missing one. Apparently, I was not good at math when I put this together. I made it 7. I don't know why I'm missing it.
There's something on the body,
Ephod.
on the torso.
Thing with all this
Yeah.
Ephod.
Yeah.
Ephod. It's ephod, right?
Yeah, ephod.
Ephod.
Ephod is the belt here with the belt we're missing. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Very good, Dave.
The belt?
Okay. Yeah, the belt. The belt. Okay, I'll add it to the next edition, God willing. So I apologize. Thank you very much, David. Okay, the next portion deals the major story of the next portion, which is Kisi. So the 9th portion in Exodus is the golden calf. So the Jewish people have a census. Moses designates the builders of the tabernacle. Again, a reminder: observe the Shabbat. You're not allowed to build the tabernacle on Shabbat. Observe the Shabbat. Moses receives the tablets. They miscounted the 40 days, and they build the golden calf. God gets angry. Moses prays. Moses descends, breaks the tablets. Moses begs forgiveness, and then atonement is on the day of Yom Kippur. We already did the calculations of that. In one of this class it was, we did the calculation of the
I
days.
think it was this class.
Or Tuesday.
I don't remember. I think so we actually did that on Friday at the Talmud class.
Yeah,
We
but you
the,
did it in one of the other classes.
right. So we can get into it another time. I'm going to add it, God willing, to the back. I'm going to add the exact times of when each one of these happened. Just for the sake of doing it properly, I'm going to read it right now, so we can know exactly the timeline. All right, you ready? Okay. So 10 days after leaving Egypt, the Jewish people were in Mara, and they received several mitzvahs, including Shabbos, the red heifer, honoring your parents. Honoring your parents was in the 10 Commandments. Shabbos was in the 10 Commandments as well. 40 days later, which is 50 days total, which is Shavuot, what we celebrate Shavuot, which will be next Saturday night. The Jewish people were at Mount Sinai at that time. They received the 10 Commandments, which was the public revelation. 40 days after that was the 17th of Tammuz, and the Jewish people were at Mount Sinai. The tablets descended, the first set, with Moses at Mount Sinai, and he broke them because of the sin of the golden calf. Today, that same day, the 17th of Tammuz, is a fast day because of that. 40 days after that, Moses ascends again up the mountain, which is the Rosh Chodesh Elul, to beg God to forgive the Jewish people. 40 days after that, which is 120 days after the first receiving of the tablets, was Yom Kippur, and that was the day that the Jewish people received their atonement, and we got the second set of tablets, and it was placed into the tabernacle, into the ark. The next 180 days, the next half a year, the Jewish people still at Mount Sinai received the majority of the mitzvahs which were taught orally by Moses. And then the following years, up to halfway through Exodus, was already written by Moses, still at Mount Sinai. And then the rest of the Torah, 40 years later, they were Jewish people, which is year 2488 from the creation of Adam. The Jewish people were in Arvos Moav, and incrementally, all the way till the end of the Torah was written in a full 13 copies, which was 13 copies, one for each tribe, each one of the 12 tribes, and the 13th copy, which was placed into the ark. Okay, I'm going to add this, God willing, next week I'll print it out so everyone will have it here. Okay, so the Day of Atonement is Yom Kippur, as it was then, it is now. It's a special power that's in that day. Sages tell us it's an incredible thing we need to know. There's a day which was a day of terrible destruction for the Jewish people. It was when the Jewish people cried because of the false testimony that the spies came to speak about the land. God says, you cried in vain. On that day, which is the 9th of Av, I'm going to give you what to cry about. And that was the same day that terrible destruction happened to the Jewish people for many, many generations, including the destruction of both temples. You talk about the Holocaust broke out on that day. You had terrible, terrible things that happened to the Jewish people on that day, right? It's embedded into that day. It's a day of misfortune, which is why people don't travel on that day. People don't go on vacations on that day. It's a day which is very serious. It's a day which terrible tragedies happen to the Jewish people. We try to stay away from trouble and stay extra cautious. Okay, same thing with the Day of Repentance, the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur will forever be the Day of Atonement, because that's the day in which God said, Salachti kidvarecha. Moses, you asked, I'm going to forgive the Jewish people. And forever on this day I will forgive the Jewish people. Which is why we celebrate Yom Kippur on that day. Every year. And today, by the way, it's a holiday. It's a day where we cry, but it's a day that we're the closest to God, because God says, you know what, if you're sincere, I forgive you. Again.
In which book was the commandment for on Yom Kippur? Which book?
What do you mean?
The
To observe Yom Kippur?
Yeah.
We'll get to it soon. I believe we have that in Leviticus. Moses pleads for closeness to God. Closeness is granted, but limited. You see, Moses begs. God, I want to know your wisdom. God says, you can have it, but it's going to have its limitations. The 13 attributes of mercy are taught to Moses, and then we have the renewal of the covenant where God says, okay, let's bring this back to normal here. Okay? The nation is now building in the next two portions of Yaakov Pekudei. They're building. Till now, they got the instructions. We had the temporary infraction of the golden calf, and now we go to the nation is building the structure and the vessels first. Again, we talk about the tabernacle, reminder of the Shabbos, contributions to the tabernacle, the construction of the tabernacle. Craftsmen are selected again, and the craft structure and the vessels are assembled. In the next portion, Pekudei, which is the last portion in the book of Exodus, we have Aaron's vestments are designed, and Moshe approves them. The tabernacle is erected. The whole assembly, everything comes together. God's presence now rests in their midst, and the cloud descends, meaning God now puts a stamp of approval on it. It was done properly. It was built properly. I just want to mention that the menorah had to be built miksha achas. It had to be built out of one piece, right? If you take take any complicated piece of art, many times what they do is they'll combine the pieces. So you take this table. This table is built of many different pieces of steel. They solder it together, and it becomes one. God says, I don't want the menorah to be built out of different pieces. I want it to be built out of one piece. Why? Because the menorah represents the Jewish people. The Jewish people, we may have many different branches, but we're all part of one. We're one piece. Wherever we are, we're part of one people. All right? We're always part of one. Okay, we have 11 portions in this summary of Exodus. We have 40 chapters and 1,209 verses. This concludes Exodus, and now let's start with Leviticus. We'll see how much time we have. Okay, the entire book of Vayikra. So we mentioned the first book was about the family of Israel. The second book was about the nation of Israel. And now it's about the relationship with God. Okay? Keeping God in our midst. How do we do that? And living holy. So Vayikra, Tzav, Shmini, Tazria, Mitzora, Achrimos, Kedoshim, Emor, all talk about the use of the tabernacle, sacrifices, and holiness. And the first two portions are the introduction to the offerings. So the people's relationship to the offerings, the rules of the offerings, and the different types of offerings. I'm thinking maybe next week I'll print out a little summary of all the different types of offerings and what they represented, what they were there for. Okay, maybe if I have time this week I'll do it. And the priest's relationship to the offerings is the next portion. The altar, the ashes, more offerings, gifts to the priest, and the desecration of the Kohanim. The consecration of the Kohanim and the priests. All right, in the third portion we talk about the priests. Aaron is consecrated as the high priest. The priestly service begins. We have the death of Nadav and Avihu. Why did they die? Anybody know why they died? They were overzealous. Not overzealous. They were overexcited about serving in the temple. And there were certain rules.
You told us there was something before that.
Well,
that happened before that, right?
True.
Okay.
But they have to come to the Shabbos morning class for that. Right? But Shabbos morning, 10 a.m., Congregation Beth Rambam, no membership required. But what we have is like this. We have, they were so excited to do the service of Hashem. They brought incense. They were not asked by God to bring that special offering to Hashem. And their souls departed their body. So we have the death of Nadav and Avihu. We have the detailed laws of Aaron. Those are required by Aaron as the great priest. We have the laws of kosher. You are what you eat. The permissible and forbidden foods. Land animals. Anybody know laws of land animals? Very simple. Split hoofs and they chew their cud. That's it. Fish, fins and scales. Birds, no birds of prey. The insects, earthly creatures, the creepy crawlers, almost none. There are a few. What's that? Chasidah. I'll talk about that in a second. We have the contamination of animals. Objects receive contamination as well. A table, a chair, a house, a building can also be contaminated by something which is impure. We can talk about that soon. Give me a minute. And then we have the prohibition of eating creepy creatures. Okay? Now, the Chasidah pointed out as a bird of prey. Now, Chasidah gets its name. Anybody know what it rhymes with? Chasid, right? It comes from the term of chesed. Chesed means kindness. And if you look at the bird, the Chasidah, which is something like a stork. A stork? No, yeah, a stork. There's long legs, like the long, skinny, right? Stork. It does a lot of kindness. And the question is, why is that not a kosher animal? Is that something that we want to take in? Right? We want to be, associated with kindness. We want to have this tremendous quality of a Chasidah. So they say that the Chasidah, although it's kind, is kind only with its own. It doesn't. If you're not part of my family, I'm sorry, I can't. Not for you, right? I have food, but only for my family. You're not part of my family, you don't get it, right? Any type of kindness that it would do would only be with its own. That's not real kindness. Real kindness is we're kind with everyone. Something that's very interesting. On the holiday of Sukkot, we brought an offering that was very unique. It was an offering that was not for the Jewish people. It was for the 70 nations. We, the Jewish people, brought an offering for the 70 nations. Why? Because we feel a responsibility. We feel a responsibility for the other nations. You want to know what kindness is? Kindness is not only for your own. Right? It's not only, you're a Jewish person, I can help you. You're not Jewish, no. For everyone, we're obligated.
We do the same for the Seder with the 10 plagues.
Right.
We dip our
Yes, so how does that relate?
To the Egyptian suffering.
For their suffering too. Very nice. Interesting, very interesting. All right, so now we have the fourth and the fifth portion here is Tazriya and Mitzorah. That's talking about the holiness of the body. The laws of human contamination, childbirth and purification, saras, leprosy, affliction, clean speech, speaking in a proper manner. You know that the power of words, right? Our sages tell us, "Chaim v'hamavet biyad halashon." Life and death are in the hands of the tongue. That tongue has the power to build worlds or to destroy worlds. It can kill relationships or it can build relationships. It can make war or it can make peace. All by the words we use. Very, very powerful. Inflammation. We talk about different inflammation, different things that happen were an indication physically of a spiritual contamination. Different burns, baldness, Mitzorah's isolation, and garments. And then in Parsha Mitzorah, the 3 stages of Mitzorah's purification. The arrogance that he has all the way to the humility that he gains. Shaving, offerings, offering of a poor Mitzorah, impurity and purification of the house, bodily impurities, male and female discharges. We will mention very, very quickly, I don't know where I mentioned this recently in one of the classes, that we see a difference between what is holy and unholy. What's the highest form of contamination? Spiritual. A deceased body. Touching the body of a dead person is the highest form of contamination. The sages explain what is holiness and what is contamination, which is the lack of holiness, impurity. Holiness means potential. Potential. Contamination or impurity means a lack of potential. Anytime you see a concept in the Torah of impurity or contamination, it's because there's a lack of potential here. Right? A person is deceased, they have no more potential, it's all over. Fuck. Right? The gates are locked. There's nothing more you can do. There's no more potential. A baby, right? On the other hand, great joy. Why does it bring us great joy? So much potential. Very interesting. Very, very interesting thing. Do you know the way a baby is born? How his hands are? Hands are like this. Closed. You know why? Because the baby is saying, I'm going to get the entire world. I'm going to acquire everything. You know that when a person dies, they die with their hands open. Right? You come in, you say, I'm going to get everything. When they die, I got nothing. At the end, there's nothing in it. Right? It's a frightening thought, but it's something that should be a wake-up call for us, that we really have to do as much as we can. We're here for how many years? Right? If we're lucky, we're here 120 years. Right? And if we're unlucky, perhaps a few years less than that. Right?
You I don't know what it's called, but you dress the dead, right?
Right.
That was my question.
All right,
too.
do you
And for
automatically-
Kedisha, yeah.
Do you automatically have to go to the mikveh right after you do that?
Are you on
No,
Curated?
okay, so today, so that's a good question, whether or not someone who performs the
'Cause you're doing-
tremendous act of kindness that is done by the Chevra Kadisha, which is the society of the burial society. There are people
That's what I was
who
gonna
volunteer to go clean the body and dress the body with shrouds. You know, it's the most dignified, most beautiful thing. If you have time, if you have the ability to do it, I highly, highly encourage you to go do it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, a beautiful mitzvah. In fact, it's the mitzvah. It says that those who perform that mitzvah are doing the same mitzvah that God performed on Moses. Because who buried Moses? Who prepared Moses for burial? God Himself. It's a thankless mitzvah because the deceased doesn't get up and say, guys, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Right now, let me get back. Right? That doesn't happen. Right? He doesn't say thank you, nothing.
But you are spiritually impure.
Oh, so
Or are you not because of
right? So
kindness?
because today we don't have a temple, the laws of that contamination or impurity are different. You still have to wash your hands. There's right? Same as someone who goes to a funeral. When you leave the funeral, when you're out of the cemetery, you wash your hands before you walk into another.
We had to do offerings, and we don't do offerings.
Right, we don't have that.
That's
All right, the next two portions are talking about the holiness of the nation. All right, so we spoke about the holiness of the priests, the holiness of the body, and now we're talking about the holiness of the nation. Again, holiness of the nation. We talk about in Achrei Mos, we talk about the death of Nadav and Avihu. Follow the rules. We got to follow the rules. Right? When God gives us certain commandments, they're meant to be followed in the way that God gives them to us, not to have, you know what, today I'm in the mood of doing something that God didn't ask me to do. I'm going to do it at the goodness of my heart. Right? Nadav and Avihu taught us, you do what God asks you to do. At the right time, at the right place, that's when we need to do it. Aaron accepts the judgment with love. Yom Kippur service. Okay, there we go. We have the confession, we have incense, the he-goat, eternal commandment of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a holiday that will be forever. That Day of Atonement will be forever. Not all the holidays will remain after the times of Messiah and all of that. All right. Service outside the tabernacle, when we were commanded not to eat the blood, we cover the blood. It's a very interesting thing. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, in the bungalow colony that we went to in upstate New York, they would have, every year, they would slaughter chickens, right? I don't remember what the occasion was, but they would slaughter chickens. I remember something, is that there's a special mitzvah to cover the blood of the animal that's slaughtered. Tremendous dignity that we have for life. We cover the blood, all right? And there's a special blessing that we make when we cover that blood. I remember seeing it. I couldn't sleep for 3 days, but I remember the whole thing that's a mitzvah. We not only do we not eat blood, not ours, not any animal's blood, which is why it's important for food, especially meat and chicken, to be made in a kosher processing facility, because it's done. It has to be slaughtered properly. It has to be washed, soaked. It has to be salted, and then again rinsed again. Right? You know what that does? That extracts all of the blood. And if, I remember my mother, may she live and be well, healthy to 120. So I remember many times I'd come home from yeshiva on a Friday afternoon, and she would send me to the rabbi to check a chicken that she was preparing for Shabbos, because she would see when she was cleaning the chicken that the chicken had some blood or it had a broken bone or something. And if after a slaughtering of an animal we find that an animal has a broken bone, then it turns out that retroactively it was never a kosher animal. So you got to throw that out, right? So my mother would send me to the rabbi. The rabbi would be able to decipher whether or not this was pre or post. And the rabbi would send me back, says, tell your mother she doesn't have to send me these chickens. It's okay, because they're sliced up by a machine. And sometimes the machine, chops the bone, right? And that's why there's some of that extra, it looks like blood, but it's not blood. It's like a certain juice or something that it still remains, or some water that gets that color. Either way, gravy, yeah, schmaltz. Either way, then we're commanded on the forbidden relationships, right? Okay, we're going to go through it quickly. I have it over here on the list. No relations with your mother, your father's wife, sister, father's wife's daughter, son's daughter, daughter's daughter, woman and her daughter, a woman and her son's daughter, a woman and her daughter's daughter, father's sister, mother's sister, father's brother's wife, son's wife, brother's wife, except through Yibum, which is Yibum is if the brother passed away and they did not have any children, and she isn't pregnant, then it's a mitzvah for the brother to marry to restore his deceased brother's name. Other is a wife's sister, a beast, bestiality, homosexuality, a married woman, a menstrually impure woman, and these are all in Leviticus 18. Sodomy and bestiality are prohibited by the Torah, and then we have holiness of the land. We talk about the holiness of the land. In Kedoshim, we have the different commandments of how to conduct ourselves with holiness, how to treat our parents, Shabbat, idolatry, charity, giving a tithing, aside for charity, Honesty, loving your friend like you love yourself. Forbidden mixtures, mixture of different garments of like wool and linen. Right? Wool and linen are not allowed to be mixed together. Weights and measures. Okay, you have to check your weights, make sure. If you're charging for a pound and it's really a half a pound, you know what you just did. You just stole. So the Torah warns us about that we have to be honest. Punishments for different prohibitions, okay? Penalties for forbidden relationships, and the land and immortality. The land and immortality, holiness, and kashrut are all discussed in Kedoshim. Emor, okay, we're just going to finish here. Emor bahar mechukatai. Emor is about the holiness of priests and the holidays. So the laws of the sanctity of the Kohen, disqualifying blemishes of a Kohen. The Torah goes into all the different blemishes that a Kohen might have that disqualify them from being a Kohen, for a Kohen Gadol, a great priest, the high priest. Safeguarding the sanctity, Teruma, we talk about the Teruma, the offerings that were given from the land. The blemished animals, desecration and sanctification of God's name, the festival of Pesach, the Omer, the Shavuot, which is soon coming in a week, in a few days, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret, the menorah, the shobret, and the blasphemer, all discussed in this week's parsha. This week that we just read was Behar, and that's about the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. We mentioned that earlier in the class today. The Yovel, the Jubilee year, the redemption of the land, the prevention of poverty, and Jewish slaves are freed on the sabbatical year from slavery. And then Bechukota, which is going to be this coming Shabbos, which is the miracles of blessing and curse. Right? God says, if you follow my ordinances, you'll get tremendous blessing. And if you don't, you'll be cursed. And these tremendous things that would happen to us if, God forbid, we did not obey the commandments of the Almighty. The admonitions, the punishments, the gifts to the temple, the census again, we tithe of the animals. And if we conduct our lives properly, we will live with prosperity, is a promise given to us by the Almighty. We're going to stop here. And thank you all very, very much. Are there any questions?
No.
No questions. Yeah, no questions. Thank you. We have the book of Bamidbar and Devarim, two more books that we need to finish, the two very, very important books of the Torah that we need to finish next week.